Hello.
Hello everyone. Bonjour à tous et toutes.
Bonjour, bonjour. Hello.
Bonjour Yann.
Hola, hola Jan.
Hola, Miriam, ¿qué tal?
¿Cómo estás?
Should we start? Wait for...
Maybe 1 minute.
Yes, of course.
Hi, Paulo.
How are you?
Fine.
Yann and Maria Antonia. Tudo bem?
Oi, tudo bem?
Tudo bem. Tudo bem.
Wonderful to see so many people from all around the globe here.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I see Christina. Hello, Christina. Happy to see you.
Hi, Yann. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Bonjour everyone, good morning here, Devika from New Zealand.
Hello.
Hello there.
It's a pleasure to see so many friends.
Bonjour Yann.
Hello, Yann Glazewski from Cape Town.
Yeah.
Non, je dis bonjour à Yann Aguila de Varsovie, Marie-Madeleine.
De Pologne. Bonjour.
Oui.
Et bonjour à Yann, l'autre Yann Glazewski.
De Cape Town.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
With a kind of name from Poland.
That's
Also.
right. Yes.
Hello, Yann. I'm Iga Józefiak, also from Poland, but I'm a co-worker of Macan Bank. We wrote together the blog post recently.
Yes, dzień dobry.
Hello.
Dzień dobry, dzień dobry.
I think we can begin now, maybe, Camila?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you, Yann. Welcome everyone to the launch of the Global Pact Coalition. We are very, very delighted to have so many of you joining us today. So my name is Camila Perruso. I'm PhD in law and postdoc researcher at the University of Paris 1. And before we get started, I want to highlight just a technical point. This conference is live on YouTube, and in view of our discussion, please do not hesitate to ask your questions by leaving a comment on YouTube or in the Zoom Q&A. We will try to answer the question during our discussion time. This conference is organized by the Global Pact Coalition and the Cambridge Center for Energy, Environment and Natural Resources Governance. Today, we will be talking about the Global Pact for the Environment. Next year, in 2022, a declaration will be adopted to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the 1972 Stockholm Conference. In order for the declaration to live up to expectations, civil society needs to unite, and that's why the Global Pact Coalition has been formed. It seeks to unite all stakeholders and together push states to act and adopt a global pact for the environment. So this conference will seek to answer 4 questions. What's the Global Pact for the Environment? Why do we need such a text? How would its adoption have a concrete impact? And where are negotiations heading to? To address these questions, we are joined by Yann Aguila, Director of the Global Pact Coalition. He's professor at Sciences Po Paris and partner in a law firm. Prior to joining the bar, he was judge at the French Administrative Supreme Court, the Conseil d'État. He chairs the Environment Commission of the think tank Le Club des Juristes and is the author of several books and articles and also reports on environmental law, like, for example, Increasing the Effectiveness of International Environmental Law, published in 2015, which proposed a global pact for the environment. He's the coordinator of the international group of experts for the pact, and the international network of about 100 experts chaired by Laurent Fabius, president of the French Constitutional Council and former president of COP21, that drafted a preliminary draft global pact in 2017. We are also joined by Ginevra Le Moli, assistant professor of international law at the Grotius Center for International Legal Studies, Leiden University. She's also fellow of the Center for Environment, Energy and Natural Resource Governance, University of Cambridge. Since September 2020, she's conducting a full-time research project at the University of Geneva and Cambridge on illicit traffic of natural resources funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation. We also have with us Maria Antonia Tigre, Director of Latin America for the Global Network for the Study of Human Rights and the Environment. Through this network, she has been working on human rights-based climate litigation in Latin America. She's also a coordinator of the Human Rights Group for the Global Pandemic Network. And she's currently finishing her SJD in International Environmental Law at the Elizabeth Hub School of Law at Pace University. She's also the author of Gaps in International Environmental Law Towards a Global Pact for the Environment, published by Ellie Press in 2020. And last but not least, we have Professor Jorge Viñuales, who holds the Harold Samuel Chair of Law and Environment Policy at the University of Cambridge, and is the founder and former director of the Cambridge Center for Environment, Energy and Natural Resource Governance. And he's also a member of the Institut du Droit International, the chairman of the Compliance Committee of the Protocol on Water and Health, a member of the panel of arbitrators of the Shanghai International Arbitration Center, and the Director General of the Latin America Society of International Law. So before I move to the conference, I would like to invite you to watch together the Coalition's launch video.
Have you ever heard of the Global Pact for the Environment? It's an international treaty the United Nations is talking about. The pact is supported by scientists, professors, students, celebrities, artists, and many climate advocates who all believe that the time to act for our planet has come.
The bad news is that some states oppose its adoption.
But the good news, there's still a chance. The People's Movement can push states to act and adopt the Global Pact for the Environment. Let us tell you why and how.
In 2017, jurists from around the world came together to draft the Global Pact for the Environment, a legal text that proposes a set of mandatory rights and duties for all to protect the environment.
Citizens, cities, businesses, NGOs, associations, and states. Rights and duties for all, because we are all responsible. Because after 50 years of declaration and treaties, efforts to protect the environment and life on Earth are clearly insufficient.
Because air, soil, or water pollution doesn't stop at country borders. Because beyond our difference and our origins, all living beings form the community of life on Earth.
Because on a daily basis, we witness the collapse of biodiversity and put life on Earth at risk. Because climate change threatens our way of life. Because we must act now, together, and use the law to help us.
Because we need to ensure our planet's ability to produce renewable resources for generations to come. And because our societies are structured around the law, we must recognize at the global level the essential principles of environmental protection.
A pact that can become the foundation of a new social contract for humanity. A contract that allows us to protect the environment because it's the best way to bring people the possibilities of a better life.
A pact that recognizes the right of everybody to a healthy environment, that recognizes the duty of states and citizens everywhere to take care of the environment.
A guiding compass that will enable access to information, justice, and process for citizens of the Americas and the world.
A pact that answers to young generation, civil society, all of us actually, because we need to lay the foundation for a new and more united world to better protect our planet and mankind. We have proposed a global pact for the environment.
We had support from political figures who brought this idea all the way to the United Nations.
In May 2018, 143 countries voted for a resolution that paved the way for negotiation.
For more than a year, delegates from United Nations member states have met to discuss the necessity of the pact, but not everyone was on the same page. Certain states wanted just another declaration, not a binding treaty that would require effective action.
In the end, the states couldn't agree. In May 2019, they chose not to choose. For them, it wasn't the right time to adopt the pact.
Despite the first defeat, not all hope is lost. A public movement can change that.
2022 is our new target. The pact will be rediscussed at the next World Summit.
From now on, citizens, volunteers, youth, public and private institutions, all will have to act in support of the pact.
We need to continue to support the pact more than ever, everyone, until it is adopted and implemented. Because the principles of the pact seek to address our current path of global irreversible transformations.
By supporting the pact, we will show the states that we are ready, that everyone is ready. Starting now, all together, let's demand that states assume their responsibility and adopt the Global Pact for the environment.
Because there is only one planet, we have no other choice. Today, the time has come to adopt a Global Pact for the environment.
Let's demand that the states recognize our right to a healthy environment. Join the Global Pact Coalition. Sign up and share this video.
One planet, one pact.
One planet, one pact.
One planet, one pact.
One planet,
One planet, one pact.
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 One pact.
One planet, one pact.
One planet, one pact.
Great. Let's now move to the talks, followed by audience questions. Let's start with Jorge Viñuales. You have the floor.
Thank you, Camila. As you may have seen, the dark side of the force was redacting our video. It's probably some conspiracy theory that is behind. It's really a great pleasure to be here with all of you. And I should say with all of us, because this community is becoming increasingly a community and it's becoming increasingly friendly. I mean, the tone is very different from and we all are day-long sharing different Zoom links and meetings, etc. But this community is far more informal and far more friendly than many of the formal events that sometimes one participates in. My purpose in this, let's say 5 to 10 minutes, is to do two things. One is to introduce the origins of the initiative, and the other is to introduce the pact itself. Usually one would start with the origins and then move to the pact, but there is a risk that by doing that, the actual content of the pact falls between the cracks. And this is what I would like to avoid as much as possible. So I will start with the reverse. I will first discuss the pact, the text, and then move very briefly to what the origins of this initiative are. So first on the pact. The main thing to be kept in mind, I guess, particularly at this juncture, is that this is an avant-projet, a pre-project. There is no clear translation other than a preliminary draft, but that would not be correct. It's not a preliminary draft. It is a fully fledged avant-projet, adopted as an avant-projet, as a pre-project, which means that it is specifically designed to be changed, to be discussed, to be modified, but it also means that it's not just a draft. It's something that took a long time and that we try to prepare as much as possible, and we try to develop a finalized text, a very good basis for discussion, I would say. We gather a lot of consensus from many people, not just in the room, but through a consultation. So there was a whole process. That's the first point to keep in mind about the pact. The second point to be kept in mind about the pact is that we're trying to achieve is a legally binding instrument, a treaty under the Vienna Convention of Treaties. And the purpose of that, and the reason for that, is that we already have different declarations, including the Rio declarations, and we have a few norms of customary international law. So what we're trying to achieve is really a binding treaty, Third point about the pact, and this is really about the content of the pact. So the pact has a preamble on 26 articles, a very short instrument, because it is intended as a sort of charter. Now, if we look at the articles themselves, the provisions, 20 of them are substantive and 6 are of an organizational nature. In the 20 substantive principles, there are many things to be noted, and I will try to briefly summarize the architecture. And I know that Yann will correct me if I'm saying something which is not entirely accurate. So in essence, there are 2 pillars of the pact. One is a right. Article 1 is a right which is very carefully drafted. It's a human right, but the right holder is identified as persons, which is a very carefully selected word, which opens up to a range of right holders. And Article 2, which is the other side, is a duty. And again, the duty bearers of that provision are very broad. These are not just states. And it's a very carefully drafted provision. Now, if you look at it from those 2 perspectives, the rest of the pact, at least the rest of the substantive provisions of the pact, try to define principles and obligations that would enable those 2 rights and duties to be, in the language of human rights, you would say, respected, protected, and fulfilled. And in the language of international obligations, you'd see fully complied with. But that's the purpose of the following articles, the 18 substantive articles that remain in the pact. Now, what do you find in those articles? Well, in essence, you find, I guess, both the basic principles of international environmental law, from prevention, the conduct of an environmental impact assessment, cooperation, also some principles that are not recognized as customary international law, but very important and very traditional, such as the polluter pays principle, some principles that are halfway between custom and treaty based, which are such as the 3 legs of public participation and precaution. But on top of that, you have novel, or at least new principles. And I shall mention just a few, just to give you a flavor. There is in terms of novel principles, I think that the main highlight is the principle of resilience. That is very dear to one of our colleagues, that was Nicholas Robinson, who was involved very closely in the elaboration of the pact. And then you have new principles, the difference between the two being that these new principles are already in some treaties, but they are not necessarily novel in terms of conceptual platforms. And those would be the non-regression principle and the specific reference to non-state actors. Moving from the substantive principles to the organizational provisions, and I will be very, very brief there. The main point of the pact was not to be heavy, not to have a heavy architectural, institutional architecture. So what you find in the pact is a sort of compromise, Article 21, a sort of compromise between what would be the Human Rights Committee and a non-compliance procedure, such as in the Paris Agreement. So you have the non-confrontational part of the non-compliance procedure, and the standalone nature of the Human Rights Committee, because the pact does not have clearly a COP, a Conference of the Parties. So this is a text that we're proposing, and this pre-project has already been translated into 9 languages, including all the official languages of the UN. Now, very briefly, 2 or 3 minutes, if Camila allows, on the origins. I will say just 2 things about the origins. The first is that this has been a snowball. So you can see the origins as a snowball process. The snowball has not been only growing, because we had some issues in the last year. But let me say this just on the origins. The idea of a global pact, or more specifically of a convention on international environmental law, is certainly not new. So there has been discussion about that since, at the very least, the early 1970s. The problem with the fact that it is not new is that it has tended to become one of those initiatives that everyone acknowledges, but no one does anything about. That only changed when the Club des Juristes in 2015, and later on the Group of the Pact in 2017, really gave it a hard push, with Laurent Fabius endorsing the initiative and the text being presented to President Macron, as well as to many other political figures. And since then, the pact actually came into the UN machinery, first with great expectation, then with less expectation, and now again with a lot of expectation. But hopefully we can see that in the Q&A. For now, I would like to give the floor back to Camila, and we can take some questions later on. Thanks very much for your attention.
I'm sorry, I'm talking and I was muted. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Jorge, for your explaining us the scope of the content of the Global Pact for the Environment. I would like to give the floor now to Maria Antonia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Camila. Thank you, Jorge, for this background on the Global Pact, and for all of you for being here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why we need a global pact, which is in itself sort of a loaded question, because the answer to this question really depends on who is answering it and what the specific contents of the global pact are. So I'll limit this because of the time and to 5 reasons why I think the pact is important. And the first one is cohesion. So one of the main gaps that we observe in international environmental law is the fragmentation of the regime. So rather than having a framework treaty that provides the core legal principles like we have in the human rights regime, for example, international environmental law really developed through a sectoral approach, responding to environmental problems as those emerged. So we have a biodiversity regime, a climate regime, a forest regime, and so forth. So these regimes don't necessarily talk to one another. And I think if the COVID-19 pandemic has showed us one thing, we learned a lot, but one thing that I think it became clear is that the environment is all connected. So that warrants a connected approach. And that is what the Global Pact for the Environment would provide, because it would postulate the basis for legal answers to existing and emerging environmental problems, as well as a baseline when the international community fails to agree on a joint response. And that brings me to the second reason, which is providing sort of this blank letter to emerging problems. So as we can see from the climate discussions, international diplomacy can be really slow to respond to emerging problems. And a lot of the way that international environmental law developed responded to problems decades ago, and now we have different types of problems. Things keep appearing, new emerging problems, and the international diplomacy is really slow to respond to that. So the Global Pact would particularly fill this gap by providing general answers when more specific ones are lacking through environmental principles. And by adopting these general underlying principles of international environmental law, we would have a legal framework to act as a guidance to emerging problems until we actually have a specific treaty that relates to those emerging issues. The third reason is accountability. So the Global Pact would also provide for more accountability from states, which relates to the two pillars that Jorge was talking about, the right to a healthy environment and the duty to protect the environment. So as we can see from the climate litigation cases that have spread throughout the globe in the past few years, the right to a healthy environment, the duty to protect the environment, and other environmental principles really provide the basis for increased accountability from states, even when those fail to accept more stringent policies. So when in the absence of rules at the international level or at the regional or national levels, relying on those principles and on the right to healthy environment and the duty to protect the environment, courts can really provide a response and ask states to do more than they're actually doing. So we can see that courts around the globe have really relied on environmental principles to develop new theories of responsibility for environmental damage, ensuring the progressive development of international environmental law. The fourth reason is to avoid backsliding. So Jorge also mentioned this briefly in terms of one of the specific principles that is included in the current draft of the Global Pact, which is the principle of non-regression. That would be specifically important for the backsliding of environmental regulation that we have observed in the past few years. I'm using here Brazil and United States as examples of this. According to the political environment that we have right now in Brazil, and now we had in the United States, there was a lot of backsliding of environmental regulation, and adopting something like the principle of non-regression and the right to a healthy environment would be particularly useful, because it would really provide an answer to this at the international level. And the principle of non-resilience would also be particularly helpful here, because it would also ensure that there's this sort of progressive interpretation of the environmental rules, and avoids that with a change of government that the rules would also change as well and would be back 10 years to what we were before. And the fifth reason, which in my opinion, is really the most important one, is the adoption of a right to a healthy environment. So the human right to a healthy environment is a story that is still being told. So when the main international treaties on human rights were adopted, the relevance of the natural environment to the enjoyment of rights was not yet recognized. So for this reason, the right to a healthy environment was not adopted in these documents. And as the environmental movements took over in the 1960s and in the 1970s, it was already late to recognize the human right to a healthy environment at the international level from the perspective of the human rights legal framework. So the right to a healthy environment then developed simultaneously through a constitutional recognition around the world and in academic scholarship. And with the broad constitutional recognition, the growing movement to recognize the right at the international level increased. And there are several proposals to do so, including the Global Pact for the Environment. During the international debate that arose from the proposed Global Pact at the United Nations, a few countries explicitly rejected the international recognition of this right. It was something that was still very controversial. And this includes the United States, which is one of the few countries that has not adopted the right at the national level. And the countries that still oppose international recognition usually do so because due to national self-interests and to avoid environmental responsibility at the international level. We now have a different government in the US, so this scenario could likely change, but other countries that oppose the pact, such as Brazil, still have the same government, and there might be still some hurdles there in trying to recognize that. So while innovative approaches have been proposed to fill this gap in international environmental law, including, for example, the adoption of a children's right to a healthy environment by the Human Rights Council earlier this year, it is likely that the debate about environmental rights and duties will mark the next decades of deliberations at the United Nations. So hopefully it won't take too long, but that's one of the main gaps that the Global Pact could actually fill. And a lot of studies have shown how that the underlying causes of the COVID-19 pandemic are the same global environmental changes that drive biodiversity loss and climate change, including land use change, agricultural expansion, and wildlife trade and consumption. So the role of a deteriorating environment, both as a cause and consequence of the pandemic, is very significant here, raising the demand for a new framework agreement and more specifically, the international recognition of the right to a healthy environment. And this recognition is crucial given the link between the right to health and environmental protection, which was evidenced by the pandemic. I think it's a little surprising to me that this has not become a bigger reason for this push that people are, at least at the diplomatic level, they're not talking about the pandemic in those terms from an environmental perspective. But I think that's one of the game changers that could actually increase this need for a global pact for the environment and increase, like I said, the accountability and ensure that environmental protection is observed as a human rights throughout the world. So there are many other reasons. There's also a lot of criticism and reasons why scholars think that we should not adopt a global pact for the environment, but hopefully that gives some of the main reasons why it's a good idea to do so and why we should continue to push for this initiative. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about more during the Q&A session.
Thank you, Maria Antonia, for these beautiful considerations regarding the reasons why we have to continue to working on this subject. Now I will give you the floor, Ginevra, and you can.
Thank you, Camila, and good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure being with all of you today. First, I would like to thank also all the organizers, the Global Pact Coalition, of course, for the invitation, and also the University of Cambridge, and in particular Synergy for hosting such an important and timely conference, I believe. And I'm delighted to be part of this wonderful panel and also to see some friends among the audience. It's really a wonderful event. So as we all know, the climate crisis, as well as the environmental degradation, biodiversity loss, and pollution contribute both directly and indirectly to human rights violations, as also been pointed out by Jorge and by Maria Antonia. The natural world is changing, and we are totally dependent on that world to enjoy a life with dignity, to use the words that and the expression that has been used a lot by the Human Rights Committee, but in general in the international legal arena, I would say. So what would be the role and impact of the Global Pact in this frame? So in the next 10 minutes, I would like to approach this specific question by focusing on one practical illustration, that is the link between human rights and climate change, and is a quite central topic today. I would like to go through how the response has been framed and also what would be the impact of the pact and of the Global Pact in this frame. So as we all know, the causality link represents one of the core aspects of climate change litigation. So I would like to briefly go through the link and discuss it conceptually, then try to clarify different forms of framing the link on the basis of 4 distinct approaches taken from practice, and then advance few remarks on the role and impact of the Global Pact. In particular, also focusing on its Article 1, on the right to an ecologically sound environment. Let me start by examining the practical dimension of framing a claim for a human rights-based climate action. And in order to use human rights law to prompt states to take mitigation and adaptations measures, an applicant or a claimant should establish that a state action or omission have resulted in an interference with the climatic system that has triggered a specific extreme weather event, and which in turn has affected or impaired his or her right. Now, there are 2 causality inquiries that to be conducted in this context, and one between state action or inaction, such threats or degradation, and the other between state action and inaction and the threats, and an individual impairment of a human right. And in the context of climate change, these 2 inquiries are far more complex, because if it's certainly well established that emissions of greenhouse gases are main drivers of climate change, the attribution of specific weather event to climatic change is still too difficult to establish. So how can we go and bridge the link between event and a human right impairment? Well, we could bridge the link scientifically, and one would have to wait until it is scientifically proven and possible to attribute a specific weather event to climatic change, and then also prove the impairment of a human right. But we could also do so legally. And how has this link been framed in practice and therefore also legally? So I will present 4 scenarios, and here I will try to also show which are more or less conducive frames for climate change litigation, and this will render more visible also the impact of the Global Pact. The first and the traditional approach has been represented by the Inuit petition before the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights against the United States. In that case, the United States, according to the petition, had contributed to climate change, leading to a severe modification of the Arctic environment where the Inuit live, and thereby to a violation of the human rights of the petitioners. And the petition faced major obstacles in connection with the causalities that I mentioned before. So with respect to the first inquiry, the petitioner acknowledged that the actual correlation between cumulated emissions and temperature increase is subject to some uncertainty. Regarding the second causality instead, no specific link between climate change, a specific weather event, and a specific impairment of human right could be established. So the Inter-American Commission also did not take position on the merits, I have to say, but overall, bottom line, the claim was not successful. The second approach instead is represented by Teotihuaca versus New Zealand. As you all know, I'm sure this is the first non-refoulement case of the Human Rights Committee, and to tackle the issue of rising sea levels and its implications for low-lying islands, coasts, and communities. And here the committee accepted the author's claim that sea level rise is likely to render the Republic of Kiribati uninhabitable. But, and here is the but, he noted that the time frame of 10 to 15 years, as suggested also by the author, could allow for intervening acts by the Republic of Kiribati. So the committee said, okay, in principle, there may be a causality, but the claimant has not fully proven its occurrence in the case. So the risk was not actual, and I'm quoting here. So the third example instead is the landmark litigation of Urgenda versus State of the Netherlands. Perfect example where, and I'm sure that you all know about it. In December 2019, the Supreme Court of the Netherlands confirmed that the Dutch government is under an obligation to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions in the short term to prevent dangerous climate change. Why is this relevant for us? Because it accepted in principle the causality link between increased emissions, climate change, and human rights, but it also then considered the second causality, interpreting the rights under Article 2 and 8 of the European Convention of Human Rights in light of the precautionary principle. So the precautionary principle became the entry point to prove the impairment and to prove the causality. The last approach instead is given by a set of cases that takes us very close to what also the Global Pact would represent. And the cases are grounded on a different legal vehicle, a different link, minorities' right to enjoy their culture, or the right to property, or the right to enjoy and benefit of one's culture. Now, these are non-climate change related cases, but here courts and also the Human Rights Committee have recognized that the right to culture or to property are necessarily implicated when indigenous lands are interfered with. So the magic of this scenario is that these rights can be more easily a ground for a claim for the purpose of proving damage caused by climate change. And the same can be said for the right of an environment of a certain quality, or for the right to a healthy environment, or for the right to a generally satisfactory environment. So why not extrapolate it and use it for climate change litigation? So what is all this discussion telling us is that it is key to understand better the framing of the link in order to also use different and specific rights, because also different rights have different prospects of success. And here it becomes more visible what could be the impact of the Global Pact in this scenario, because the pact would provide what I call a direct highway, an entry point to reach the goals and more broadly environmental protection, because it is an instrument for action that enshrines the right to an ecologically sound environment, which would be a perfect entry point for climate change litigation, providing even a broader scope than the right to a healthy environment in itself. And it recognizes the duty to care of the environment, which would, as it was also mentioned before by Professor Viñuales, would extend also to non-state actors, also corporations. And it also includes substantial principles and procedural principles to implement them. And it also envisions pact control mechanisms, which would ensure the effectiveness of these principles. So in short, what would this imply? 3 points before I conclude. Citizens' right to an ecologically sound environment of both individual and collective nature would be recognized and fully enforceable. The pact will most likely drive legislators in each state to enact new protective environmental laws. And the last point is that it will inspire also and provide judges with a solid basis to reach more ambitious and environmentally driven solutions, especially in climate change litigation. So it will trigger a new dynamic, and in my perspective will certainly also create a unifying perspective, a coherence that has become urgently needed today. So I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ginevra. Thank you very much for showing us the importance of the Global Pact for the environment. And we'll move now to Yann. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here. It's incredible to see so many friends. So, bonjour à tous, good morning, hola a todos, calimera. It's incredible to see all of you. Thank you. Many thanks to you. Many thanks to all the partners of this event, in particular Cambridge University. And many thanks to all the speakers. I will explain, to finish the first part of this event before the debate. I will just say a word about where we are and most of all, why we need now to mobilize civil society. It is the goal of the Global Pact Coalition that we are creating. So, a word on the status of the negotiations around the pact. In short, we can say that there have been 3 seasons. It's a bit like a Netflix series. So, season 1 was the season of the success story, the pact success story. It was, it was a very moving moment for us. The project landed in front of the UN General Assembly. And it all went very quickly, maybe too quickly. At the beginning, we were a small group of tourists. We proposed the idea of a global pact. And in 2017, we draft a pré-projet, like said Jorge, a very pre-draft of pact with 100 of tourists. And finally, 1 year later, only 1 year later, on May 10, 2018, the UN General Assembly adopted a resolution entitled Toward a Global Pact for the Environment. It was incredible, and it was the last episode of the first season. So we arrived at the second season in 2019. It was the season of the negotiation, and it was the season of the failure of the pact. As many of you know, we met great difficulties with, in particular, a few states that were very strongly opposed to the pact. To not name them, the United States under Donald Trump, Russia under Putin, Brazil under Bolsonaro. So a few states put the pressure on. And it was surprising because I forgot to say it, but the resolution of the General Assembly was adopted by an overwhelming majority, 143 states in favor, 143, and only 5 against. And so in short, in the end, these 5 states won and blocked the process. How is it possible? Because of a rule, and I discovered this rule in decision-making in many international forums called the consensus method. As soon as a few states, which are a minority but very powerful and very strongly against a text, are opposed, it's not possible to pass it through. So that's basically the end of the season 2 of the Global Pact. We stopped on a new resolution of the UN General Assembly, adopted in August 2019, second resolution, which chose to prepare only a political declaration to be adopted in 2022. So a declaration, not a real international treaty. Just a word to say that it was, of course, a disappointment. And I think that there is a huge gap between what is at stake and the decision-making process and what the states are doing. Because what is at stake, we have to remember that, is something as fundamental as the protection of the earth. What is at stake is one of the major issues of our time: climate change, decline of biodiversity. And what the states are doing, they postpone the decision. So here we are now living season 3 of the pact. Negotiation on the declaration are underway. And here we have to look on the bright side. In French, we say to see the glass half full and not half empty. And now, to be optimistic, we have 2 certainties. First, in 2022, there will be at least 1 international conference, maybe 2 international conferences in the field of environment. In February, the UN Environmental Assembly in Nairobi, and in June, the next Earth Summit, probably in Stockholm. And second certainty, in 2022, at least 1 text will be adopted. We don't know exactly where, in Nairobi, maybe in Stockholm, maybe 2 texts. Everything is possible. And the negotiations can lead to an ambitious declaration, firstly, which could be the reference text for the next decade. For example, recognizing the right to a healthy environment. And I saw David Boyd and John Knox, and I know that they support the idea of the right to a healthy environment. And more than that, why not? The negotiations could lead to the comeback of the idea of a global pact. Anything is possible. Circumstances have changed. For example, with the arrival of Joe Biden in the United States, we never know. The idea of a pact could come back. And personally, you know what? I think that this idea will come back. I don't know when, one day or another, we will have this kind of text, a pact, a charter, whatever its name, we will have an international treaty recognizing rights and duty in the field of environment. So we think that we have to be ready. We have to be ready, and we, the jurists, we have to maintain the pressure on state. But, and I come to the point of the Global Pact Coalition. To do so, we need to mobilize civil society, because I often realize that when I talk about the Global Pact for the environment around me, with my friends, with my family, people are very interested, but they haven't heard about it. They don't know about the Global Pact. So we say to ourselves, time has come to create a movement with young people, with NGOs, with citizens, beyond the jurists, to explain that we are ready. We want the state to adopt a kind of global pact, whatever its name, of environment. And just a word about why we need a pact, why we need a treaty recognizing rights and duty in the field of environment. I see 2 reasons. The first is a legal reason. The Global Pact would be a legal tool to better protect the rights of citizens, because we are all citizens. It's about our rights. It's about the rights of our children. And these rights are very tangible, very practical for citizens. To take a concrete example, if a company pollutes your lands, if you want to sue this company in court, you need a legal basis. And for example, you can argue that the polluter violates your right, the right to a healthy environment. But the issue is that this right is not often recognized in domestic law. The pact could recognize this right at the international level in a legally binding text. This is the first reason. And more than that, there is also a political reason, because I think that the pact could be a political tool also, not only a legal, but also a political tool. It could be a symbol of the post-COVID world. I think we need a kind of constitutional moment. And the pact could be a kind of new social contract. A pact could be the first global treaty on the environment. And it could be at the end a kind of compass, a guiding compass for all of us, citizens and states. So that's why we created the Global Pact Coalition. And I hope that many of you will join the coalition. Just to conclude, I want to say something. One lesson can be learned from the history of international relations. There's always hope. In 2009, the Copenhagen summit was a huge failure. States failed to agree on a climate agreement, and it was a missed opportunity. However, 6 years later, in 2015, the Paris Agreement was signed, thanks to the perseverance, optimism of women and men of goodwill. There's always hope. And just 2 months ago, we learned that the United States came back to the Paris Agreement. There's always hope. And in the same way, in 2019, states decided to postpone the idea of a global pact. It was a missed opportunity, but I think that there's always hope for the pact, and more than that, hope for the planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yann. Thank you for always looking at the glass half full. And we will start now the debate, the discussion. We have several questions and a lot of comments, very rich in the chat. But I will just to start this round. I will ask you for all the speakers to answer. We will start with 4 questions. The first one, which governments have agreed to support the pact? Which governments are actively against it? How could it be adopted in the United States, given that you need 67 votes in the Senate? Would it be better to focus on clustering the environmental conventions? Another question, can we get an idea of which clauses of the draft pact are hindering the adoption of the pact? The third one, what about the principle of unity and integrity of the Earth system to consider under international law the planetary boundaries? The pact includes the right to a healthy environment, but also a principle not yet recognized under international environmental law. And the last one, should we consider the inclusion of rights of nature as one of the main principles within this and other nature protection projects? So perhaps we could start with Jorge.
Okay, there are too many, so I guess that I cannot answer even
no.
a subset of them. But let me just give you some thoughts. I mean, I have been following with a lot of interest a discussion that has been developing in the chat, and that is quite fantastic because you have all the the people who have been involved in all these major processes. And I guess that the first thing that I would say, and I would need to add is the question of who exactly is opposing, because I don't think that is clear today. I think that was clearer last year, perhaps, but today is not entirely clear. Now, on the first, one point which I think is very important is the United States do not need to be in the pact. They are not in many multilateral environmental agreements, which are very successful. The UN Convention about the Sea, the Basel Convention, well, the Convention on Biological Diversity, we can discuss if it's successful or not, but the US are not in many of these big treaties. As long as it doesn't, it's not opposing them, it's fine. And that is something that Jim Salzman mentioned in the chat, and I think it's very true. Second point on you were saying, I mean, there are many questions. What are the pacts? What are the parts of the pact that are a problem or could be a problem? A traditional pushback has been on the institutional architecture of the pact, and that is quite legitimate because there are so many treaties out there, each with its own COP and secretariat and this and that. Just reporting to all of them is a nightmare, and paying for all of them is very complicated. So what would a new one do? So that's why the pact is actually trying to do something very light in that respect. And we came up with that idea of a very sort of a mixture between the Human Rights Committee and the Non-Compliance Committee. But you still need some sort of architecture because this is a principles pact. And in a principles pact, you need a body that unifies interpretation. And that's absolutely key. Otherwise, what the pact is trying to achieve, which is a sort of unification of interpretation of certain principles, would not be achieved. So I will stop there. I know that there are many other questions, but I think that I would mention the fact that one part of the reluctance came from the possibility, it's not the only part, that there are other people saying that it would overlap with existing treaties, some other people saying that it would not serve any specific purpose. You can have very specific rebuttals to all those points. We have written about it with Yann and even published a full sort of report on that. But I'll stop there. We can, and I'll try to read some of the questions, and while others give it a try to other questions.
I can go next and answer some of these questions, if that's all right. I wanted to mention that actually in the book that I published last year, Gaps in International Environmental Law Toward a Global Pact for the Environment, the book is really meant to be a travaux préparatoire of a potential new agreement, and really delves deep into how it developed from its origins, and actually it tracks how the governments responded to the idea of the Global Pact and some specific arguments pro or against it. So like Jorge said, that changes. Obviously now it's different than it was a year ago because governments change, and the diplomats that are there in the negotiations also change, the priorities change. But if you're interested, there's actually a specific chapter that really covers how governments responded to the main issues there. Regarding the question about the planetary boundaries and the rights of nature, I think the beauty of this process is that we really do have a blank slate here to actually negotiate a brand new agreement that could be obviously based on how the Global Pact was drafted, that it really gathered the knowledge of over 100 experts in everything from different countries and from different areas. So there's a lot of expertise there that we could use, but we could also include different things and more innovative things, and include concepts such as the planetary boundaries or the rights of nature. The rights of nature is something that it's an idea that really has developed a lot in Latin America, where I'm from, and that has sort of spread and ignites this new idea that we should not only grant a right to a healthy environment to humans, but also to nature. And that's definitely a concept that is interesting to delve deeper into. But I think obviously something that we have to keep in mind all the time is that we have the ambition to do something obviously very innovative and interesting, and there's always the setback from states and the diplomats and how they're going to respond to this. So there's likely going to be a balance, and it be something in between what the states that are completely opposing this don't want to see there, and what nonprofits and other stakeholders are really envisioning as a very progressive new agreement. So hopefully we will get something that's very progressive. And it's still, I think, in a couple of months, we will see how states are going to respond to what the proposals are right now. Because as the first draft that they actually presented in this new season 3, like Yann called it, it's actually, it doesn't really bring much news. So hopefully we'll get to something that's a little better than what it is right now.
So if I can just follow up also what Antonia said, I would like to simply refer to the fact that there was also a question on clustering, if I'm not mistaken, because I've also gone through all the questions and they're just incredible. So of course we have to try to address them with some order, but the question on clustering certainly is important, and it is true that there are certain aspects that have been clustered, but on the other side, the moment that we talk about a pact, we talk about also a set of principles that would somehow be overarching, and also they would clarify areas that are interconnected. So the idea is really to try to provide consistency and coordinate international environmental agreements that may appear, it is true, fragmented, but on the other side, this system and the Global Pact would provide coherence and somehow strengthen also the sectorial protection of the environment by way of also funding principles. And in terms of support, it is certainly essential, the support of states, but we do not have to forget also the importance of NGOs, civil societies that can also reach then and support us in reaching committees, members of the committees, as well as judges in courts that can also make a change. And we've seen this also at the European Court of Human Rights now. There is an important movement towards the idea of trying to include the right to a healthy environment. And there are, of course, different points of views. We have also had a declaration from a conference of the president of the European Court that was recently said that the European Convention still remains an important way of guaranteeing rights in light of this transformative moment. So still within the boundaries of the convention, something is possible, but with the Global Pact, we would instead try to go a bit further and affirm the right to an ecologically sound environment. And this leads me to my last point on the discussion that we had on the right of nature, and also the right to an ecologically sound environment that, as I mentioned also, my presentation would be broader than what is, for instance, the right to a healthy environment. And why? Because the moment that we have the right to a healthy environment, and this is why I believe Article 1 is perfectly framed, because it does of course refer to health, but not only, because the moment that for instance, we have the right to a healthy environment, you have to prove the moment that you are in court, for instance, that the environment has deteriorated and the environment has affected your health. The moment that you have the right to an ecologically sound environment, then you can limit the proof to proving that the quality of their environment is harmed, making no longer, for instance, no longer generally satisfactory, and then meaning that the right is violated in itself. The link is already there. So this is essential, and this will certainly open the possibility of even more litigation and more claims possibly. So that's why just to conclude, I think that the pact will somehow overcome what can be considered fragmentation, but on the other side, it will also set the pillars that are still may appear still unclear to some.
I'm really sorry. I'm trying to unmute myself, and it's a little complicated. I'm sorry. I don't know, Yann, if you want to address some. Yes, you have the floor, of course.
Okay, thank you. Just very, very quickly. First, I'm impressed when I read all your comments on the chat. Thank you very much. It's very, very interesting. And I don't know what can I add to all these very interesting comments. I just want to say that it's difficult for me to answer the direct messages that I received. So I give you here my email address if you want to go further. Just maybe about 2 points regarding the process and regarding the content. First, regarding the process, I think that there was some question about the states. Are the states going to adopt the pact? I don't know, but I think that for the moment, we can play our part as citizens, as jurists. And I led to the diplomat, the issue of the diplomatic issues. I met many diplomats, very willing diplomats, and who are trying to move things forward. And they tell us, try to do something to help us mobilizing citizens. Because they say, we diplomats, sometimes we feel like we were alone. When we try to support an idea and we try to talk with our fellow diplomats, we must feel that we have supported by youth, by citizens, because if we are alone in the front line and we look around you and we are alone, diplomats, it's difficult. So I think that we can play our part, mobilizing and trying to put pressure on state regarding the process. Regarding the content, I see that we have many new ideas of new rights which are not in the first preliminary pre-draft. And I think it's a very good thing because why not? I don't know, but we can have the debate. Why not include the right of nature, the protection of animals? It is not in the first draft. We can have this debate. And that's why, and I want to give you this information, we are creating, with the help of Jorge, a new blog, a specific blog for the declaration. It will be launched in 2 or 3 weeks. It will be called Pathway to the 2022 Declaration. And it will be a blog by jurists for diplomats. It's important, for diplomats, not only by jurists, for jurists, but it is for diplomats. And the idea is to have, and we will launch call for papers to all of you, and I hope that all of you are going to contribute. The idea is to disseminate short articles, very concrete articles, to contribute to the reflection of diplomats in particular in preparing the 2022 declaration. So, for example, this kind of idea, rights of nature, etc., can be proposed in this blog, and you will receive the newsletter about this new blog, and I hope that you will be that many of you are going to contribute.
Thank you, Yann. We had a lot of questions regarding the mobilization of civil society and the initiatives and the strategies that we are taking in this process. So thank you for answering already these points. Perhaps a question that is, how do we revive the political will to adopt the pact in the form of a legally binding agreement over the next 12 months? Which country or individuals or group could realistically and powerfully spearhead this initiative? Perhaps Jorge, perhaps you want to.
Yes, yes. I've been very actually busy trying to multitask and reading all the wonderful discussions that are taking place at the same time. So let me just before I go to how we can sort of create momentum to do something realistic in the short term, let me just emphasize what Yann has said. We are launching a blog precisely to capture discussions of high quality, such as those that we have been seeing in the chat on the right to an environment of a certain quality to be defined, or the issue of how to give a voice to a different perspective that had been already attempted in 1982, but that was unsuccessful and remains unsuccessful. And I could say a word about that later. But in short, I think that the only answer on how to gain momentum, this is the only answer that I have, is persistence. We have to be persistent. I have to say personally, I'm not cynical. I'm not a cynical person, but I can be. And I recall that, I mean, for many years, even when I wrote my first textbook on international environmental law, I didn't really pay that much attention to the large discussions about the Global Pact, the convention. I mean, there was not the initiative of the Global Pact at the time. It was 2014, 13, 14, around those. Then actually we had this chat with Yann at some point in 2017, and I think that the idea sounded much more realistic, and I think that it sounded much more realistic because there was enthusiasm. In all the history of the proposals on how to come up with a new treaty and so on, except for the Brundtland report that actually recommended the conclusion of a convention on international sustainable development, except for that very specific moment, the idea of a global pact never got that much political attention as in 2018. And in 2018, I recall even that there was a joint bilateral meeting between China and France and the two leaders talking about the pact. And I think that that was really powerful, I mean, really powerful. Of course, it was a different time. I'm not sure we can count on that specific momentum, but probably yes. But the only answer that I can give you at this point is persistence. The fact that we have been working and taking a lot of time in the last 4 or 5 years, despite the fact that we had our traversée du désert, and we had our bad walk through the desert after the Nairobi process and after the opposition, and we kept going, and we're here, and we're going to be there in 2022. And if it doesn't work in 2022, we're going to be there nevertheless, and we're going to be bringing this idea time and time again to the forum. I think that's the only answer in which you that I can give you at this point: persistence. And if you're even more motivated, well, probably join the blog as well.
Well, thank you. Sorry if I'm from my micro. Perhaps Maria Antonia or Ginevra, you would like to continue the discussion? Ginevra?
Yes, now I can unmute myself now. Sorry, I was trying to. Yes, and I would like to just add a few follow-up, perhaps, to what Jorge said. The idea of, yes, persistence and consistency, in the sense that we have seen now also a lot of movement, not only for the Global Pact, but also from young generations. And we have before the Committee on the Rights of the Child, we have a petition that has been filed in 2019 by 16 young people from different countries, Argentina, Brazil, in order to somehow hold governments and state to account for the effects of climate change. And again, we don't know where it will go forward, but there have been other cases, Juliana versus United States, that again, most of the times they stop at the admissibility level. But what I wanted to say is that also the movement from the young generations is extremely important to push forward the idea of the Global Pact. And I also want to mention that I'm part of the Italian community that support the pact with other 4 colleagues, and that are wonderful. We had a meeting yesterday. We planned how to move on at the national level, and that's what also we need. We need a movement at the national level in order to also spread the word as much as possible. And I also want to say that we are trying to contact people that are also not only state representatives, they don't perhaps they're not only working in parliament, but also from the art world, from NGOs or from institutions that would sort, and I have to say that they are all responding very positively and with a lot of enthusiasm. So I can see that there is an energy and a willingness to support the Global Pact and the ideas of the Global Pact. And this is also what we need in order to send out the message. You will certainly learn soon about our projects. I don't want to disclose too much, but we are preparing something very nice, and we hope that the aim of persistence will and the message of the global the message of the Global Pact will be conveyed.
So maybe a last word regarding the need for mobilization, in particular for young people. But sometimes we are young in our mind, so it's for everybody. I just want to say that first, we are creating also, we have many ideas. So we are creating a network of Pact ambassadors. That means young volunteers, who are going to help us to make it famous, like Ginevra said, to spread the word. And we have many, I'm going to show you what we have. We have many wonderful t-shirts about the Global Pact. And it's you know, in Paris, Paris is the city of fashion. So if you want to be, to follow the fashion, you need this t-shirt. We have also wonderful bracelet with the Global Pact. And so there is many advantages if you join us, if you join the Global Pact Coalition, and we are at your service. We are at the service of this idea. And maybe I just want to say something to you. If you want to help the idea, make it famous, and say it to your friends and say them to join us it's very simple. You go on the website and you have just to put your name, and it would be very, very useful for this idea. We need to be not only 100, just this event is wonderful. It's when I see all of you, but we need to be not only 100 or 300 or 400, but we need to be 100,000 and maybe more to support the Global Pact for the Environment.
Thank you, Yann and Jorge and Ginevra, for spearheading so many wonderful pushes for this initiative. It's really been a pleasure to discuss the Pact with you and be part of this project from its inception. And I love how innovative it is in how you spread the word about this and continue to be persistent in pushing this through.
Okay, perhaps you have a last word also.
Yeah, just a quick word. Actually, I think we have enjoyed the ride, and we're going to keep going. It has been very enjoyable, really, and I think that the event represents a little bit the spirit, a spirit of informality, but plenty of enthusiasm, a lot of persistence. Behind the scenes, we're working day and night, and we're going to make it happen. I mean, and again, I was saying that I can be quite cynical, but I do believe in this, and we're going to make it happen. I cannot tell you when exactly, but this is going to happen. Hopefully not too late.
Maybe a last word. I just want, as a last word, to quote. You know this word of Margaret Mead. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals, citizens, can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has." And I think that it's possible.
Thank you very much, Yann. So with these wonderful words, thank you very much for all, and we are concluding this conference, and join us to the Global Pact Coalition. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Muchas gracias. Obrigado.
Grazie. Buona serata.